Alright, this is second series of the Boca Bearing videos, replacements. The next set that I'm going to do, this is on the Protos 500 helicopter. The next replacement thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the main shaft bearings. And I took the liberty of removing the head already. There's just a lot of screws to remove, so I didn't want to take that time on the video. Most of you Protos owners, you already know the amount of detail that screws and stuff that you have to remove. So the three bearings that we're going to remove are the upper, mid, and lower bearing. And basically, to do this as easy as possible is to take off all the screws that hold the servo cage and the screws that keep here, here, and here, and this bottom one that keep the frame together. Also remove the two screws that go into the motor mount. That allows you to pull the frame to release this bottom bearing. Otherwise, you won't get to this one. So the last thing that I did was I left one screw on the servo, on the elevator servo, and so basically when that's removed, you can back that servo out. It's okay to let it hang, it's not in any way. And then you could lift the entire servo cage out, and that allows you to access. There's two screws, set screws, that hold the upper and the mid bearing in. So you need to remove those, like so. Pop that bearing out. My finger's a little big here, so bear with. We'll set that bearing aside, and then there's another one, another set of screws here on the bottom, on the mid bearing. So again, you need to back those out. And then push that bearing out. These are the bearings that are being replaced. These are the ones that were in the unit already. Now, as I said, I mentioned that I took apart these screws here that keep the frame together, and there's also two screws that hold in here, one here and one here. I had to move my ESC out the way. That lock this lower bearing in. So that's pretty easy to access. So once you get to that, you can literally pull the frame apart and then just kind of get that bearing out of there. There it goes. It's out. Now, I forgot to mention the tools that we need are your hex drivers. You need a screwdriver for your Protos owners, because there's a couple of them that have a Phillips head screw that go into the frame. Some extra Allen key drivers, never hurt anything, and some Q-tips. Q-tips are to wipe around where the bearing is seated just to clean that to accept the new bearing. Because I constantly oil my bearings, there's nothing wrong with the factory bearings. I just want to upgrade. I wanted to upgrade and do this bearing video for Boca, and they were gracious enough to sponsor the video and give me the bearings, basically in the guidelines that I need to stick to. So anyway, you see it's kind of dirty. So the replacement process is pretty straightforward. You simply take the bearing, the new bearings. Now these are Boca ceramic bearings. These are ABIC 5 rated bearings. They're not the 7s. It's not needed. But snap them right back in. Take your set screws that catch just the outer edge of the bearing, to keep it from coming loose or working its way up, and you simply just reinstall them. Pretty straightforward. You don't have to, Protos owners, you know, well, no need to over torque these things. It's in a nylon frame. You don't have to use a lot of force to set this. Once it seats, it's there. Once it makes contact with the bearing, that's all you need. The mid bearing, upper bearing are in. Now we got to get into that lower bearing. It's pretty easy. Basically take it, set it over, get your hands ready. I didn't want to take the entire frame apart, as you should, but let's see, this is going to be a little painful here, but pull the frame apart just enough to get that bearing inside that housing. There it is. And it's set. Bearing's inside. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's right in there. Now that's set inside. It's good to go. The next step is to reinstall the screws that hold that housing. Now these are nylon lock nuts, so you don't got to worry about it any Loctite or anything. They have that plastic or that rubber coating inside, and they lock up fairly well. take your lock nut, place it to the opposite side. You can kind of push it with your finger on the back side till it seats inside the keyed area where it rests, and just tighten it down. So that's it. Nothing much to it, not other than you got to remove all these screws here to access this. But once it's done, it's done. The OEM bearings have been replaced. You simply take your servo cage, slip it back down into its location where it needs to be, and then start reinstalling all the nylon hex screws again. Now wherever there's metal to metal, is where you use the screws with the washers. And I'll reinstall this servo right away here so as not to forget where it belongs. And that's pretty easy also. Again, you don't have to use a lot of force. Snug them up. Protos has done a really great job engineering this thing, where these sit in there firm. I mean, you don't have to do any shaving, any kind of modifications to get their servos to sit. The only modification I had to do with this Protos was on my frame was to accept a new motor, and not to get off track, but it was a very easy mod. I just had to take a Dremel tool and roll this over a little bit because the can itself is a little bit wider than the 880 series. Aside from that, that's about it. But again, where the servo's cage meets the motor, where there's, sorry about that, not where it meets the motor, but where it meets metal is where you have to use the screws with the washers. Gives it that up and down side play, a little bit of movement, so you can adjust your servos. That's the only area, and that's typically on the plastic frame. That's the lower portion of the kit. All the upper areas use nylon. No metal to metal, so it's just direct into the nylon housing. One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. This one accepts the canopy grommet. Need your swash guide. Now we get to the other side and repeat the process. So we got the nylon on top, no washer, second one, no washer, because it's in the top, it's in that nylon, so you don't need to use any kind of Loctite, anything of that nature, because it's good to go there. There's a canopy. Again, no need to torque it down. It's not necessary. You over torque it, strip all the nylon in there, the threads. You'll never get it to set again. Possibly the only way to have it re-threaded or cut new threads would be to use a larger diameter screw. And I'm just not into that, so we won't even talk about that. This particular thing that I have here, this is my ground screw. I have this helicopter grounded in several areas, and the only reason is because Protos did have some issues with static. So that's all that is. That's just extra precaution. That in. Pretty much a wrap there. Now we go to the sides here. And you have to be kind of a little be a little ingenious when you're working with this one, because there's not much room to work to get this little screw to sit down inside this casing. So you gotta guide it in there. I'll use this thing to hold it down. Take the screw, run it through. Once it catches and it starts, then you're good to go. You could just keep going, keep going, and keep going. There we go. Locks it right up. So we'll do another one. And the same technique. Lay that over. Take the Allen or the set screw there. Oh, I'm sorry, that's for this one here, this bottom one. Why, I don't know. Protos went from Allen screw, metal, just a regular metal Phillips head screw. I don't know why they did that. Basically, that's pretty much it. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of re-engineering to get this thing going or to do any kind of replacements. It's kind of cool that pretty much everything in this Protos heli is wide open. Wide open. I mean, it's just right there in front for you. This is a particular screw in question as to why they went from all the Allen screws, and then this one takes just a simple metal screw. It goes right into the center. Now, what I've done with my Protos is I made a custom mount for my ESC, as you can see. It's right on the side. Now that I have these tightened down, I can go ahead and reinstall my screws. Got another one, lower one at the bottom. Pretty much you guys get the gist of it. It's pretty much done now. I've got just a few screws left. I'll go ahead and get these on so you guys can see. This is for the motor mount. And I leave them backed out slightly because I need to add tension to the belt when I get ready. So I leave them just like that for the time being, just till I get everything set up and I'm ready to adjust my belt tension. But for the most part, the focus of the video, upper, mid, and lower bearing are now replaced with Boca Bearing 5 ceramic bearings. The entire kit, bearing replacement kit for this helicopter, from the head to the guide pulleys again, this will be the next video. The guide pulleys, tail assembly, tail bearings, and even the main grip bearings. This entire kit is now available at Boca Bearing. They've set up a kit that is Protos 500 specific. So you can go and get the entire bearing replacement kit, the main bearings that are effective by high RPMs. There are more bearings in this heli. There are some for the fly barred version, and those, I just don't consider those necessary for replacement. There's some very small bearings that are in here, in the washout arms. For example, there are very small bearings in the slider, for example. These bearings here, I just don't see a need to replace them. They're basically for pivot. They don't receive any kind of high RPMs. They're not under a great deal of constant spinning. There's no the load is basically zero on those. It's just a pivot point. So there's really nothing as far as a demand for it to be replaced. The main things are the main bearings where the main shaft runs through, the lower bearing, because all these receive high RPMs. Gotta sand that down a bit, but anyway, so that's basically what the kit's designed for. It's designed to replace those three, upper, mid, lower. The kit includes the guide pulleys. There's a set here, there's a set here, a set here. So there's an upper and lower bearing, upper lower bearing on the opposite side, same thing, upper lower bearing, and tail bearings, tail shaft, grips, tail grip bearings, guide pulley here, the tensioner, belt tensioner, and that's pretty much it for the kit itself. You can go on bocabearing.com and look at the price. I believe it's not that expensive. It's like 50 bucks, 60 bucks, something like that. I might be wrong. And then they have the orange seals. You can customize your own thing like I did. I have a custom set of orange sealed bearings on here, ABEX 7s on this motor, and I tell you what, this thing is basically warm after flight. It's not even hot anymore where you had to go like this and touch it and you really couldn't put your hands on the motor because it did get hot. This thing is smooth. It is smooth. So tomorrow I get to do a video of now the combination of the ABEX 7 bearings in the motor, the ABEX 5 bearings on the main shaft, and so my next video series will be replacing the grips bearings and the tail grip bearings. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and you Protos owners really need to upgrade.